Good evening. I'm Dr. Nilay Yagnik, Provost of Navrachana University. Welcome to this webinar series of Navrachana University. This particular series is conducted by the Center for Professional Education of the university. I'm very happy to inform you all that we have had a formal collaboration with a very leading, one of the world's leading management consulting firms called GELRAD. GELRAD was started by former GE executives, top executives of GE, and they specialize in various areas of providing training and consulting in the fields of Lean Six Sigma, Agile, and such kind of areas. We want to bring that into India today because in India, we need to have such best practices in order for us to improve and go to the next level. And this particular Center for Professional Education will provide such kind of training and consulting for students, for professionals, as well as for corporates. And I'm so happy today that we have a very good speaker, Dave Hauff, who is the director of GELRAD Europe. Incidentally, it's so nice today that all the four founders of GELRAD, Praveer is attending from GELRAD in the United States, at Connecticut in the United States. We have Elaine, who is attending from GELRAD, United States. She's based in Florida. And we have Dave, who is based in London right now. And we are all here in India. So welcome to all of you once again, and we all look forward to this wonderful session from Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilay sir. Now I request Mr. Dave to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. I shall share screen.
Yeah,
I cannot
please.
share screen. Now I
please.
can share screen. There we go. Okay, fantastic. All right, okay, let me just minimize that and I'll tuck the chat there so I can see your questions. Fantastic, all right, so good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Dave Hauff and I am indeed in London. You might be surprised to hear that based on my accent, but that is where I am at the moment. Just very briefly, a personal introduction before we kind of dive in. This is what I looked like before coronavirus happened. Some of my measurements have increased over the last few months. Certainly the length of my hair is one of those, possibly the circumference of my waist. But I'm originally a nuclear engineer. That's what I studied in school. I worked for GE for about 10 years. I started at GE Nuclear Energy. I did do work for the Fukushima nuclear power plant, but I was not responsible for the wall that keeps out tsunamis. That was somebody else who's supposed to be looking after that one. And while working at GE, I learned about problem solving. And actually the first thing I learned about was something called workout, which is a rapid approach to problem solving, where you get people in the room who do the work on a day-to-day basis. And you ask them what we should do to make things better, because generally the people who do the job, they have a better idea of how things really work than maybe even the people who designed it. You know, so I worked for the nuclear business. I also worked for the lighting business of GE. So if you've got a machine making light bulbs or lamps, as they're known in the industry, and things aren't working properly with the machine, traditionally what you would do is you would call the engineers. And the engineers would come in and they'd get their clipboards out, maybe their slide rules or something like that, and they would do some calculations, and then they would tell you what it is you should change. But the engineers don't generally know that sometimes with this machine, you've got to just sort of give it a knock in just the right place to make everything sort of sit properly for the machine to work. And that is not there in the engineering drawings. It doesn't say, you know, hit here or anything like that in the drawings. So that's actually the first approach I learned when I started at GE. That was 1992, a few years ago. I'm not that old. I was 6 at the time, maybe when this was happening. And then not long after that, along came Six Sigma, just a few years later there. And that's really the approach that I've been doing now for 25 years or more in the world of problem solving. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is, of course, part 1 of 3. We're going to do an introduction to Six Sigma today. In a week, we're going to talk about lean thinking, lean management. And then a week after that, we're going to drill in a bit more on both Lean and Six Sigma into some of the tools and the concepts. So today's going to be a bit more of a, excuse me, high-level overview on the methodology and kind of the thinking that goes with Six Sigma. So that's right. Just to start with a brief history of Lean Six Sigma and the pieces of that. It goes all the way back to long before most or perhaps all of us were born, starting with the Toyota production system, even back in the late 1940s. And then it really was picked up and made a bit more popular by W. Edwards Deming, who kind of worked in the 50s and created what you may have heard of the Plan, Do, Check, Act, really sort of codifying what it was that Toyota was doing. And there was a lot of that went on for a couple of decades until total quality management became popular in the 1980s, TQM. The mantra there was zero defects. That was sort of the goal of what it was we were achieving. And then Six Sigma came along really in the mid 1980s at Motorola. And again, they took some of the work that was being done and formed it into a methodology. The idea of lean, which we'll talk about more next week, appeared in the late 1980s as a way of describing what it is that Toyota were doing. And there's me in the GE Six Sigma experience there in the mid 1990s, myself and the rest of the founders of GE, Elaine Prevere and Ram Josula, who's also on the call as well. And then Lean Six Sigma, kind of as the combination of these two things, was really start of 2000. You may look at it and go, "Gosh, not a lot has happened in the last 20 years." You know, Dave doesn't have anything on the timeline here, but it's not to say that things haven't been happening. It's just that really the kind of the foundations of where we are goes all the way back more than 70 years now. This takes a lot of different forms. Things like Agile, which we mentioned is an offshoot of Lean, kind of a specific application of Lean in a software sort of environment. So it has a lot of different names. Even the methodology itself can have a number of different names for the steps in that, which we have done in working with a number of customers. So what is Six Sigma? Well, it's a lot of things actually, but if I had to summarize it down to just a couple, on the left, really, a systematic and disciplined approach to reduce variation. That really is the home of where Six Sigma came from. We have processes that are running. We're producing parts, you know, Motorola, right? We're making these pagers, and these are complicated things, and they have a lot of parts. And you know, each one of them individually may sort of be okay and within spec, but the variation that comes there can easily add up and make a pager that doesn't work. And so really Six Sigma started its life around, how do I reduce variation? How do I get consistency in what I'm doing? And it's really kind of expanded into an overall methodology around solving the problems, understanding the customer needs, and making things work. It also has a role as a measurement, quality metric, which I'll mention that one in just a moment, that talks about whether or not we're meeting the customer requirements. As a strategy, as an approach, as a methodology, it really comes down to just a few things. So first of all, understand what the requirements are. So if I don't know what it is we're trying to achieve, if I don't know what the customer wants, it's going to be very difficult to actually deliver that. And so I have to get the target, understand the specifications. What is the upper specification? You know, anything beyond that is bad. What's the lower specification limit? Anything lower than that is bad as well. We want to be in this range or in this zone. And then go find out what's actually happening. Go and measure the process and get an idea. What is the mean? What is the standard deviation? What is that current performance? And where are we generating the defects? And then I can do a couple of things to make that better. So first of all, the example that's here, we're off center from the target. And the most likely thing that happens on this curve is not actually hitting the target. We're off a little bit. So the target's still within spec, but thanks to the variation, we're sticking out. If I can center that process, get that centered on the target, a lot of the defects go away when I do that. And then lastly, can I reduce my variation? So how can I take that curve and squeeze that in so that it's very unlikely that I will fall outside the specification limits? And people have been doing this for now, I guess we're more than 30 years, 35 years, something like that. That's the thinking that's been. And of course, these tools and these principles go far beyond that. I mentioned Toyota production system in the late 40s, but a lot of these principles go back even further into the 1930s and 1920s. So it's been around for sort of a long time. And that's the idea. Understand what's important, go find out what's happening, center the process, and reduce the variation. I mentioned also that Six Sigma is a measure of performance. It's a way of saying that something is good or not. So something that is a 6 Sigma level of performance is better than something that is 3, which is better than something that is 1, or even a process that has a -1 Sigma level. That's entirely possible. And to give you an idea of what that means in terms of performance, it's typically said that, you may have heard this before if you've had any experience with Six Sigma. Six Sigma is 3.4 defects per million, which is what we've captured here in the table. It's actually it's actually really 1 in a billion that's bad, but that's another conversation we don't have time for today. But in terms of 3.4 defects per million, or 99.9996% good, how does that compare to what most people would think is actually quite good? You know, if we would think I could get my process to 99%, that'd be excellent. You know, only 1% bad. Well, what does that actually look like? So given I live in London, I grabbed a couple of UK examples here, and I knew I'd be talking to people in India, so I grabbed an India example here. We'll look at that one. You guys can read, so I don't need to read all these to you. But if we take the lunches in Mumbai by the Dabbawalas here, roughly 200,000 of those every single day. At 99% good, I'm going to miss a couple thousand of those every single day. At a 3.4 defects per million level of performance, I'm only going to miss 1 every day and a half. Okay, so the difference there is quite significant. Excuse me. Now, not all processes need to operate at a Six Sigma level performance. In fact, most of the time, 99% is probably pretty good or good enough. But when you're making something that's quite sophisticated, like a pager, which we don't make many of those anymore, or a mobile phone, or an airplane, you know, all these things matter an awful lot more. I can't live with 99% good. It's not good enough. And so that's where Six Sigma came from. That's sort of its growth. It's rare that I've worked on processes and projects where we need to sort of get to that level of performance, but it's important to understand that to get the measure to know how good we are, I have to know 3 things. I have to know what the customer requires. I have to know what the specification is for that. And I have to know how the process is performing, and not just the mean or not just the average, how much variation is there as well. And that's really the power of Six Sigma as a metric, is it combines all 3 of those things together. With any of those pieces missing, I don't really know how my process is performing. By the way, as we go through, I should have said this earlier, if you have any questions that you want to pop into the chat, I do have the chat hovering over on the side here. I can keep an eye on that and try to answer them. Otherwise, we will have Q&A sort of in about, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour from now, something like that. Excuse me. Okay, so that's Six Sigma as a measure. And really the transformation that we're trying to achieve here is the picture that you see on the screen. So this is a very simple graph that shows our performance on the left side. This is our baseline, and this is our process. It goes up and down. You know, sometimes I have a low amount of waste or defects. Sometimes I have a high amount. There's variation around that. Of course, there's some kind of average. We can calculate standard deviations and all that. But our goal is to have that breakthrough. Find a way to understand what is happening, why it's happening, and make it go away. And so get it in specifications, like the example here. Everything below the line is good. Everything above the line is bad. Sometimes we hit that on the left in the baseline by luck. But luck is generally not a great business strategy if that's what you're hoping to work according to. So let's get the whole process, let's move it. Let's move that mean. Let's get that below the customer spec there so we can have most of the time be delivering what we want. And then let's have it behave consistently. Let's reduce that variation and eliminate the signs of unusual or unexpected things happening. And that's really what our goal is, to get ourselves in specification and in control. And our goal is 70 to 90% reduction in defects. That is a not uncommon goal that I see in the projects that I coach. How do I feel confident about that? Well, I have Pareto on my side. If you've heard of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, 80% of the problem comes from 20% of the causes. And so I'm pretty confident when I get into most projects, it's just going to be a few things. So if I can identify what those things are, take action on those, I've got the reduction that I'm looking for. I said we're going to talk about the Lean next week and 1 week. Lean came out of a world where the focus was on waste. As we said a minute ago, Six Sigma's focus on variation. One of the topics we're not going to discuss in the webinar is design for Six Sigma, which is about creating something entirely new or completely redesigning your process. That really comes from a world of complexity. And there's really never a pure lean design or a variation reduction improvement style kind of project. Every project has aspects of these to varying degrees. And one of the things that we do in GELRAD as coaches is to help teams identify what's the best approach to take here, given the kinds of problems you're having, what methodology, what tools, and that. That's what we help to do to try to do that. There's always some elements of these pieces in all the projects that we're working on. And really, it's not about the tools, it's not about the methods, it's really about your mindset of what you go through and how you're thinking about the problem as you solve it. And that's what I'm going to talk now through for the rest of the time we have together. A bit about the methodology, the mindset that comes with it. And then again, in webinar 3, we'll look at a little more detail about the tools, but the tools aren't very useful for you if you've got the wrong mindset. Okay, let's dive in a little bit. So the methodology itself. So this is the Six Sigma methodology. When Motorola first started with this, it actually only had 4 steps, which was measure, analyze, improve, and control. The first intro that I had at GE, before I even did my Greenbelt training, we kind of had a little overview of that. And then GE ran around and started doing a lot of measuring and analyzing and improving and controlling. And some of the things we worked on maybe were not the most important problems, or we didn't have necessarily a clear enough goal of what we were trying to achieve. And so we carved out the define phase as a method. And this is what Six Sigma has been now for 25 years. So first of all, define the problem. Let's understand really what's going on. What problem are we working on? Who's the customer? What are their requirements? What's in scope and what's out of scope? And who's on the team and what are our timelines? Kind of that usual project management stuff, we have to do that as well. Even though that's generally not the focus. If you're going to do some Six Sigma training, we don't generally focus on those project management tools because there's other training that we can do for that. So let's get a clear direction of where we're going, and then let's go get some data. Let's see what's really happening and get the baseline, that current state with facts and data. You know, what's really happening in the process? We probably have a process map for this thing that is not working properly, but that's probably not what's really happening, because if things were happening like that, we probably wouldn't have any issues. Things would be working okay and we wouldn't have any problems. So let's go see what's really going on. And then in the analyze phase, we'll also use the data that we get in measure to understand why the problem is happening. What are those root causes? So that then when we put in solutions in the improve phase, we're putting solutions in against the root causes we saw in the analyze phase, and not just the symptoms that we saw when we first discovered the problem in the define phase. So for example, if you've ever had a headache, I have this conversation a lot with the groups I do. You know, if I ask people, when you got a headache, what's the solution to that problem? And people will always say some kind of headache tablets. And it'll be ibuprofen or paracetamol, or in the US, acetaminophen, same drug. Or sometimes people even go old school and take aspirin. But anyway, so if you got a headache, you take the aspirin, you take the tablets or whatever, and the pain goes away. But if I wait 4 hours, the pain's going to come back, because that's kind of how those drugs sort of work. And so, of course, what usually happens is I take more pills. And actually, don't take it like that. That's too many. But like, follow the instructions on the thing. So, you know, I take more medication. The pain goes away. But then 4 hours, the pain comes back. So I take more medication. And then 4 hours later, I realize there's a hole in the back of my head, because as I went for a walk today, I walked under some scaffolding. People were working up above, and maybe they dropped a tool and it hit me on the head. So maybe I forgot that happened, a concussion or something. Anyway, but even then, that's not actually the root cause of the problem. So I have a headache because there's a hole in my head, and I have a hole in my head because somebody dropped a tool on it. But why did they drop the tool on it? You know, when you're working up on scaffolding, you can't just throw tools around because you'll kill people. You know, there's got to be some netting up there, or it's got to be, you know, tied onto your belt in some way. So was the tool not tied on? Did the strap break? You know, and if it broke, why did it break? Did we not maintain it properly? Was it damaged? Why was it damaged? You know, we've got to go all the way back through the chain to those initial conditions of what got things started, because time in history has shown it's generally cheaper and easier to fix things here than to put all the mitigations in place for everything that happens once this thing gets started. Okay, but a lot of the problem solving we do in business is headache tablets. You know, a problem comes along, we do just enough to make the pain go away, and then we move on to something else. But we don't really get to the root cause. We don't really make it go away forever. So wait 4 hours or 4 days or 4 weeks or 4 months. If you don't get to the root cause, eventually it's going to come back. And that's what our Six Sigma methodology is for. So you'll notice putting solutions in place is step 4. It's not the first thing that we do. And this is often different from the approach you may get if you work with big consultancies. You know, they have a big repository of solutions that they've done with other companies. So often their approach is, we see a problem and let me start telling you about solutions that work somewhere else. You know, and some of those may actually be really good ideas. Other of them might not be. And that's why we have measure and analyze. And then, so once I've put the solution in place, the control phase is about making sure that it actually is better, and then making sure it's sustainable in the long run. So I do a lot of training around this, and I always ask people, you know, what are the steps that we are good at, you know, and what are the steps we're not so good at? Because we've all had experience solving problems, and I usually hear a lot of the same things really from the groups. We say, yeah, we're pretty good at seeing something's not working and define. We're pretty good at coming up with solution ideas. In fact, that's the thing I usually hear first, is we kind of jump straight into solution mode. I hear that, you know, sometimes we have a lot of data, but we don't always know what to do with it. Or maybe we don't have time to do the measure and analyze because I feel like I have to get on with the solution. And I almost always hear that we're usually not very good at control. And that's because control is kind of, control's kind of boring, actually. You know, like fixing the problem can be very exciting. Making sure it stays fixed can be boring, really. So if you think about it, if you've ever tried to lose weight, the actual process of losing weight can be really interesting. So each day you step on the scale and you weigh yourself. By the way, you're supposed to do that. If you want to lose weight, you got to weigh yourself every day. So you get on the scale and you weigh yourself, and you weigh less than yesterday. You know, and that feels great. The little dopamine thing happens in your brain. You get a good feeling about that, right? And then the next day you weigh yourself and you've dropped again. It also feels great, right? But by the time you sort of get to your goal, right? You get to your goal weight. You don't need to lose any more weight, and you're getting on the scale every day. But now nothing's changing. And so I get on the scale, and today I weigh the same as yesterday. Okay, so that's good. It's a good result. I haven't gone up, but it doesn't carry the same sort of psychological payoff as when you're losing, right? And after several days, it's very easy to lose focus on that. And so that's often why control doesn't happen, is we lose. And if you stop weighing yourself, and again, you know, many of you may have experienced this, as have I, if you stop weighing yourself, you will slowly start to creep back up again because you're not keeping an eye on it. Because anyway, so I hear a lot of different things from companies, but a lot of them are the same. And the one I mentioned before, the thing I hear the most, and the thing I hear usually the first thing is this: I see a problem and I jump into solution mode. And I used to sort of think about that like it was some kind of character flaw or thinking flaw, right? Because I'm an engineer, you know, and in engineering, whatever the situation is, there's an algorithm to go through, right? So civil engineering, we talked about buildings a moment ago. If you're building a building, there's a set of calculations you need to do. There's like certain equations you have to pick. You better do them in the right order, and you'll kind of follow them through. Because if you skip steps, the building will fall down. And it's very simple. They're simple, or at least it's very straightforward. It's probably a better way of saying that, right? So skipping steps is not going to work. It's really bad in the engineering world. So this whole jumping over measure and analyze never felt right to me until I read a book. And the book is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I don't know if you've read this book, but I would strongly recommend this one. In fact, it's probably the most important book I've ever read in terms of the work that I do in problem solving and understanding the people that I work with. And this guy, he's a winner of the Nobel Prize in economics, not actually an economist, but he won the Nobel Prize because he and another researcher, Amos Tversky, they worked out that humans are not rational decision makers, okay, which is probably not a big surprise there. Now, you probably knew that one, but they were able to put some numbers to it. And they discovered that as humans, we tend to weight our losses twice as much as the gains, right? So if you've got a $100 gain and a $100 loss, if you put those in a spreadsheet, they add up to zero. Okay, but human brains don't work like that. We tend to weight those losses twice as much as the gains, right? So if I'm going to have like an economic policy where I tax you and take some money, so I'm going to take $100 from you or something like that. If I'm going to give you something back, I can't just give you 100. I've got to give you at least 200 to make it worth it for you because of the loss that you feel losing that $100. They call it loss aversion, right? We do things to avoid losing. And by the way, I take 100, I give you 200. That only gets us equal. You know, if I want you to feel better about the new world, I need to do even better than that, make it more than double. And that's that's what he won the Nobel Prize for. But that's in the book, but it's not. The book is not strictly about that, right? The book is about how our brains work. And in the book, he talks about system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is the immediate, effortless thinking that we do, where your brain just does it. And you don't even have to concentrate or think about it. In fact, it happens automatically. You can't even control it. Okay, so I can't see you guys. We don't have cameras on and things like that. But if I could, I'd love to watch faces during this bit. So, for example, right now, I would like you to do not think about a little yellow fluffy duck. Okay, don't think about a little yellow fluffy duck. Okay, don't do that. Okay, and I know right now you're thinking, don't think about the duck, don't, right? Because as soon as I say the words little yellow fluffy duck, your brain goes, ooh, I know that one, and the image appears in your head. And you can't even control that. It just happens automatically. System 1 is also things like if you've ever left work at the end of the day or school or whatever, you need to get home, whether it's a car journey or the bike or the train or a bus or whatever. I'm sure it's happened to you where all of a sudden you're home and you really don't remember anything about that journey. And that's because system 1 took over and it did all the things you needed to do. It made all the turns. You know, if you needed to make some decisions, if you're in a car, you needed to accelerate and brake and follow lights or whatever, you probably didn't pay a huge amount of attention to that. It just sort of happened. In fact, you probably were spending your time on system 2. And that is the thinking that does require energy and does require effort. So if I said to you, what's 17 times 24? Most people don't have an immediate answer to that one. So if I said it's 398, you know, am I correct? Now, I know I'm talking to people in India, right? And you guys do your times tables up to 20. So actually, there is a chance that folks on this call will be able to know that actually I'm wrong. It's not 398. It's actually 408. But for most people, that kind of a question, they can't do that right off the top of the head. System 1 doesn't know the answer to that one. I need to engage system 2. And physiological things will happen when you engage system 2. So your heart rate will increase to get more blood to your brain, and your blood pressure goes up along with that. And your pupils will dilate, you know, and the harder you're concentrating, the wider they will go. And you might even make a system 2 face. This is a system 2 face. This is a system 1 face. Right? This was a Simpsons episode. I would just do that for the next 20 minutes. But there's actually a connection between your face muscles and your thought processes there. And so system 2, because of the effort that's involved there, generally we avoid it. System 2 is lazy. You know, we don't want to do it. And this affects how we work and how we make decisions. So that's what the book is about. And there's a lot of wonderful things in there about biases, cognitive biases, things like confirmation bias that you've heard of, the availability bias, a number of them. We don't have time to talk through them, but I want to just show you sort of the system 1, system 2 in action. Okay, so I have a quiz for you. It's a three question quiz. You don't have to stick answers in the chat or anything, because what I'm looking for is your reaction, your intuition. So there's 3 questions here. Every single one of these 3 has an immediate, obvious system 1 answer. Okay, and that's what I'm looking for. That's what I want you to pay attention to. I know you're all smart. Okay, I know you could read these and you could think about them and use system 2 and get the answer. That's not what I want you to focus on. I want you to recognize what is the immediate answer that comes out for each one of these things. Okay, so here's the first one. A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Okay, now I don't need to pause for long because most people are thinking 10 cents. right? Because that's the obvious answer that's there. How about for the second one? If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? You probably just thought 100 minutes, okay? Because we can follow patterns, 5, 5, 5, 100, 100, 100. And the last one, in a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? And a lot of people are probably thinking 24, because 24 is half of 48. That one we can generally do in our head. System 1 gives that to us. Okay, all 3 of those answers are incorrect. Okay, you can be smart now. Okay, so the bat and the ball costs $1.10. Anyone want to stick in the chat what the correct answer is for this one? I'll give you a moment if you want to participate. Otherwise, I'll just tell you. Nope, nobody willing to stick it out there publicly. Okay, that's fine. Correct answer is actually 5 cents, and then the bat is $1.05. If it was 10 cents plus the dollar more, that's another $1.10. That would be $1.20. The ball actually has to be 5 cents. There we go. We got one in the chat there. Thank you. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? I'll give you a moment for that one. See if anyone wants to play. Yeah, nothing coming in. Okay, yeah, this one is actually 5 minutes, because that's how long it takes to make a widget, right? So if I have 5 machines, in 5 minutes, I'll have 5 widgets. If I have 100 machines, I'll have 100 widgets in 5 minutes. If I have 1,000 machines, I'll have 1,000 widgets in 5 minutes. That's how long it takes a machine to make a widget. And what's the correct answer to the last one? Anyone want to have a go at that one? All right, someone was ready. Indeed, it is 47 days. I got a couple of people in there. It is indeed 47 days. It'll take 47 days to fill half the lake. It'll double again on the final day, and that'll get us to being entirely full. So the 10 cents, the 100 minutes, the 24 days, those answers come immediately, right? I don't even have to really think about them. They just come. They even sound right. They feel right when I say them. The only trouble is they're wrong. Okay, they're incorrect. It's not 10 cents. It's not 100 minutes. It's not 24 days. So if this were a business problem, we would be overpaying for our bats and our balls. You know, if we were buying that from a supplier, possibly. We'd totally overestimate the time it's going to take to get our production done in the second one, right? So that's why it's important to have system 2. So I had lots of wonderful insights from the book, but probably the most important one was that when we see a problem, this leaping to solution thing, it's not about flawed character or flawed thinking or whatever. It's that's how our brains work. So when you see a problem, if you have any knowledge or experience at all in this area, you will have an idea for a solution. You know, and it's coming whether you want it or not, like a little yellow fluffy duck. Right? So you're going to get that solution idea. Now, the good news is system 1 isn't stupid. Okay, so system 1 has learned from system 2 over time. So like when I first started talking at the beginning, most of you probably knew straight away that I was from the United States. You know, that happens automatically. Nobody ever sits there thinking, oh, I wonder where he's from. You know, if you hear me talk, you know what American people sound like, you'll know straight away that's where I'm from. And system 1 does that for you. And you were right. You know, even though I've been in the UK for 23 years, I sound like I'm from America, because it would be ridiculous if I started putting on a British accent and people would want to hurt me. So I don't do that. So I stick with my American accent there. I will not be ordering the sun-dried tomato and basil ciabatta. You know, that's not going to happen. So that happens straight away. System 1 does it. So when you see a problem, you may have an idea for a solution, and we do measure and analyze, and it turns out you're right. You know, that's actually that's a good situation, right? I had a good idea, and it was right. But the nice thing is, now that I've done measure and analyze, I've at least got some backup for that, right? I've got some evidence that I'm doing the right thing. But what you may also find is you see a problem and define, you have an idea for a solution, we go and do measure and analyze, and it turns out what I thought was the solution is a terrible idea. It's actually the exact wrong thing to do. Or what also happens is, it's an okay thing to do. It will solve some of the problem, but it doesn't really address most of the root causes. Okay, and so that's why we have the measure and analyze. So it will happen. System 1 will do it for you. And now we've got to use system 2 to engage to see, is this the right thing to do? Excuse me. So you may have heard this language before, do, learn, do. So do something, learn something from it, and then do it again. I mean, sometimes people say that's an agile sort of thinking, a lean approach. I've seen it in other forms as well. That's kind of a system one approach, and that works really well when we're right? So if you have the right idea and the right thing to do, you can go do it. And if I need to make some adjustments, I can do that, and that's fine. And that may work a lot of the time. Six Sigma is really more of a learn, do, learn approach. It's really more of a system two approach. So before I start making changes, let me make sure that it's the right thing to do. Otherwise, I may make a lot of trouble for myself or even make things worse. And if you have any industry experience at all, I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of that one where somebody has come along, they've done a project, they've declared success and how wonderful it is, and you're sitting there thinking, I think things are actually much worse than they were before, and yet everybody is saying it's so wonderful. I think it's highly likely that they didn't really follow a Six Sigma approach. They maybe didn't really get a baseline, and they don't even have an after the fact to compare to. Okay, so Six Sigma, as we said, it's not about the tools, it's about the mindset that you walk through as you're solving the problem. So what I'd like to do for the next, I guess, half an hour or so roughly is where we'll go to, is talk through the methodology and some of the mindset and experiences I've had that go with that. And again, we'll look in greater details at the tools in webinar 3. And again, if there's any questions you want to pop in the chat as we go along, that's absolutely fine. So in the define phase, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? That's our big question here. There are a number of tools that are here. I'm not going to talk through the detail there, but this is the approach to make sure we're focusing on the right thing. We understand the scope, we know who the customer is, and we've actually engaged with them to understand their needs. And we've started the process of engaging our stakeholders. Who are the people that are impacted by this? And we've built a plan to influence them and work with them. And we've done the project management things that I mentioned before. If you're not pointed in the right direction, you can run as fast as you like, but you won't get to your destination. Okay, I said that, but I'm sure other people have said something like that. I'm sure there's various versions of that. But if you can imagine, when we were working for GE, Jack Welch was the kind of leader who would say, okay, everybody, we're running that way. And then we would all start running. We may not always have known why we were running, but Jack says go that way, so we sort of go that way. But if you don't actually get the right direction when you do that, you can run as fast as you like and you won't get to your destination. And I was chatting with Pravir about this, and he said, actually, do you ever notice that we run faster when we're lost? Right? Because you start to panic and then we just keep moving rather than stopping to try and get your bearings. So really that's what the define phase about it. It's about getting your bearings, making sure we know where we are and what is specifically the problem that we're trying to solve. And I've got an example from about a year ago of a project I was coaching for that one. So this project started with the idea and a very simple problem statement that says, we're spending too much money on credit card fees. Right? So when the customer buys our service, they can sometimes pay through their credit card. And of course, we have to give a cut to Amex and the other companies that are there for processing that transaction. And the fees are getting bigger and bigger. And that's sort of where we started with the project. And we wrote a problem statement and we built up a project charter with some other elements on that with a business case and a goal statement and so on. And then we brought this back to the sponsor and we reviewed it with him. And he said, well, it's not really about the fees. I mean, I know it's not, we don't want to spend that money, but that's not really what we're trying to solve. It's really more about the customer experience that we're trying to have. So the project leader, she went back with her team and we kind of talked it through. And in the end, we changed the focus of the project to be not about the fees, but about the cases that would come in from customers complaining that they could not pay with the method that they wanted to, right? So for example, maybe I wanted to pay with my credit card and I couldn't, or I ended up having to pay with my credit card, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to raise a PO or do something like that, right? So the total focus of the product changed from making the fees go down to trying to eliminate those cases from coming by making it possible for the customers to do what they wanted to do and improving customer experience. And that really is a core part of Six Sigma thinking, is to try to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. and understand what their needs are, what their requirements are. And if you can improve the customer experience, that's what drives satisfaction and growth. Okay, so a lot of what we're doing, if I think about all the times I've coached product, I've trained thousands of people, I've coached hundreds of projects. Whenever we're having issues around the problem statement, not always, but most of the time, it's getting clarity on what really is the defect that we're trying to fix. Is it that we're spending too much money on the fees, or is it something else to do with the customer experience? How are we going to measure the thing that we want to make better? And if we can't figure out how to measure it, it's going to be very difficult to move forward. Okay, so when we write problem statements, we do this in a very specific way. I'm not going to talk through this now, but I think we will spend a little bit more time on this in webinar number 3. We look for some very specific components in the problem statement. I mentioned one of them already. What is the defect that we're looking for? But I want to now to actually speak briefly about the bit at the bottom of the slide around causes and solutions, because one of the things that I see happen all the time when we're writing problem statements is that we tend to start talking about the causes and the solutions. And that's usually because we have experience in this area, so we already have ideas about why it could be happening or what possible solutions are, but we don't want to have those in our problem statement, and I'd like to explain why. So certainly in the English language, we use the word problem to mean more than just problem. Okay, so we use the same word to mean problem and to mean cause and to mean solution. So we've already mentioned weight loss here. So I could very easily say the problem is I eat too many carbohydrates, right? So some years ago, I wanted to lose weight. Someone had recommended the Atkins diet to me. Not everybody's heard of that one, but if you have, it's one of these low carb, like paleo, those kind of diets there. And that's the Atkins diet. And so I did that one. So I could easily say the problem is I eat too many carbs. Okay, but that's not really the problem. That's a possible cause of the problem. Or I could easily say the problem is I don't go to the gym often enough. And that's not the problem either. That's a possible solution to the problem. When we're talking about weight loss, and when I have a group, we have a dialogue about this. But what really is the problem there? The problem is I'm overweight. And even then, that's not good enough to just say I'm overweight. I need to be specific about the kind of weight we're talking about, right? Because nobody says I'm overweight, too much bone and hair, right? That's not what we mean when we're talking about being overweight. It's that one. It's the fat. And that's the one that the doctors tell us is unhealthy, especially if you've got, like, for men, the belly fat and so on. That leads to increased risk of heart disease and things like that, right? So it's very easy to say the problem is I ate too many carbs. The problem is I don't go to the gym often enough. And if that's how you describe your problem, then the first thing you will do on the 2nd of January is you'll go get yourself a gym membership. And then you'll go for the rest of January, and then you'll never go again. Okay, because that's how gym memberships work, if you've ever had one. Right? You in that first month, like especially the first week, you might even go twice in the same day. There you go. Oh, I'll go in the morning, I'll go again in the evening, right? By the 3rd month or so, you're lucky if you went once that week. And by the 6th month, you're still paying, you probably haven't been at all, right? That's generally how gym memberships work. They make their money off of people not showing up, right? If everybody who had a membership showed up, they'd never handle the capacity, right? So if you say the problem is I need a gym membership, the only possible solution to that is a gym membership. You have no other option there. And I was using this example, at least 10 years ago now. And I mentioned that I had done the Atkins diet, and I said something like, by the way, if you do the Atkins diet, you will lose weight, right? Because the science is very straightforward there. Yeah, carbs is sugar, right? So it's sugar, or it's things like pasta, rice, and bread, and so on. That it's not sugar when we eat it, but your body very quickly turns it into sugar, and then it says, oh, we should probably hang on to some of that for later. And of course, it stores it as fat. So I said this thing that, oh yes, Atkins works, right? And this woman stuck her hand up and she said, I did Atkins for a month, and I didn't lose any weight at all, right? And I thought, well, you probably didn't do it right. But what I said was, well, how interesting, tell me more, right? And so she said, so I did Atkins, and I was also going to the gym, and I wasn't losing any weight at all. So I went to my doctor, and she ran some tests, and it turns out I had a thyroid problem, right? So she had a hypothyroidism, I think is that one. And And so the doctor gave her some medicine, and then the weight dropped off, right? Because it wasn't the diet, it wasn't the exercise, you know. So that's usually it's great advice, you know. So for most of us, how we eat and how we what our activity is like, that's almost always it in terms of what it causes for fat. So for most of the time, System 1 gives us those, and System 1 is right. Apart from when it's wrong, right? Apart from when it isn't the diet, it isn't the exercise, it's something else. So if you start writing about causes and solutions in your problem statement, you will miss the opportunity to catch your thyroid problem, right? And you're not going to lose weight, and you might have other serious medical complications that kind of come from that. Okay, so that's why in the problem statement, I won't go back on the build, we've got to avoid the causes, we've got to avoid the solutions. Okay, so we'll look a little bit more detail in that when we get to part 3. And we'll play around a little with the problem statements. I'll show you kind of what that looks like in practice. Okay, so that's really the define phase. That's the thinking. Get focused, get aligned, get pointed in the right direction. And then in the measure phase, let's go get some data. Okay, what is the current state of what's happening today? Again, a number of tools that are there, but they're really all around figuring out what data I need and getting that, and then also understanding what's happening from the process perspective. What's really going on? And we will continue to engage and update our stakeholders as we do this. And so let's get to that current state. You're getting the baseline. We've talked about this already. And oh gosh, I messed up the build on my slide here. So apologies for that. We'll just ignore what's there. When you're getting the baseline, at the beginning, we've got to get that current state. So I used to travel a lot. And before coronavirus happens, don't spend a lot of time on planes anymore now, but I used to spend a lot of time in hotels, and I would go places where I would have issues with jet lag. And so I would be awake at weird times. So sometimes I'd be awake at 2 in the morning. And if you ever watch TV at 2 in the morning, there's weird stuff on usually. And often it is some kind of telemarketing scheme that is there. Not telemarketing, but it's some kind of marketing thing. They're trying to sell you thing, like it's online shopping, that sort of thing. And invariably, it's always something about exercise equipment. That's what they're looking for. And in these infomercials, they're usually not just 30 seconds. They might be 30 minutes as they try to sell you their equipment, right? And you will invariably see some kind of picture like this at some point during the ad there. Here's what it looked like before, and then now that they've used our wonderful equipment, here's what they look like after, right? And of course, the before picture, we all looked terrible. It was terrible lighting that was there, and of course in the after, I've been to the tanning salon and I comb my hair and all that sort of thing, right? Anyway, so they have to have these things in there because most of the ad is not that. Most of it is all the fitness models that we know they hired them to use the equipment there and to look really, really good. And of course, the idea is that if I use the equipment, I will look like those people. But every so often, they have to put in these pictures of people who have a normal genetic profile, which is us here, right? And so they have to, oh, look, even a normal human was able to use this and achieve these results. And they have to do that for credibility. You know, so if you don't have either one of these pictures, we don't have any credibility. You know, if all I have is a bunch of pictures of fitness models, that doesn't help. I got to see what these people look like before they used it, right? Or if all I have is the before picture, and I don't know what people look like now, that doesn't help me either. I have to have both of these. And this one on the left here, this is really my measure picture here, and this one is my improve and control. Oh, Control Z, click Control V. There we go. This is my improve and control picture. Okay, that's what I need. That's what I need to have as my before and after. That's why we're getting the baseline here in the measure phase. Okay, so I just want to share a story with you about seeing what's really happening and how important that is. So I did some work with a laundry company a few years ago, industrial laundry, which is both high tech and low tech at the same time. Okay, so this particular facility, they were serving hospitals. Okay, so all the sheets and the gowns and the doctor's scrubs and all that kind of stuff, all would get processed, pillowcases, towels, all that would come to the central facility where it would all get sorted and washed and dried and folded and sort of returned. And the margins are very slim on this because every minute kind of counts in terms of how you're working. And one of the things they have to do is the red bag wash. And this is for special stuff. So in the hospital, gowns and scrubs generally are fine to just kind of go in the regular laundry, unless they start getting contaminated with fluids that you don't sort of want people touching without protection. So those would go in a special red bag. And this bag is itself dissolvable when it gets into hot water. So these would be specially handled and so on, and they would go into a red bag wash. And what you see on the right is, this is what the program is for washing these things. And so the people doing the sorting, they were saying, it's taking too long for us to get through the red bag wash, right? We're not able to push things through fast enough to keep up with the volume. And so I talked to the engineer who owns the machine, and he said, let me show you how to look at the program. Here you go. It takes about 31.5 minutes, about half an hour for it to do the wash. So it really shouldn't be an issue. With the calculations we've done, it should be fine. So I went and got my phone out with the timer on it. I got there with the clipboard, and I stood there and I just watched it go from start to finish and captured, here's what's really happening. So everything that's red is not included in the machine program. And of course, there's time to load the machine and unload the machine at the start and finish there. So that actually counts, right, in terms of the time it takes to do a red wash. But all the other pieces that were in there are things that are not counted in the machine's program for the elapsed time. So things like filling the machine, that takes a little bit of time to do that. I just have to move the chat to see the number. Yeah, it takes about 30 seconds to fill the machine to be able to do that. It takes a minute and a half to drain it. It takes, even after the drum has done a high spin, to stop spinning is another minute and a half. The timer on the program sits there completely motionless and does nothing. It's frozen while this is happening. So if you look at the bottom, the actual time for this was nearly an hour. It was almost double, right? And so what you've got to do when you're solving problems, you can't just trust what's in the documentation or what the machine parameters say or what somebody else tells you. You've got to go and have a look at it. That's really a core part of Six Sigma. Go see what's really happening. Okay, the same for Lean, which we'll talk about next week. And you also have to be ready to say to yourself, I could be wrong, right? I think that I know, but actually what I think I know could be incorrect. The engineer was absolutely certain that a red wash was 31.5 minutes because he programmed it, right? He knows that's there. What we never saw was the reality of the time that it took. So that's an important thing for us personally. We don't see a lot of that these days. Certainly on social media, there's a lot of people who are absolutely certain about pretty much everything because they read it on some other page or whatever. But to actually go and get the data to see for sure, you've got to be ready to say, what I think is how things work or what I think is the answer, I could be wrong. It's a very important part of the mindset. And it's okay, it's okay to be wrong. Actually, that you don't have to be right about everything all the time, and no one expects you to be, right? But that's your ego has to allow you to do that, right? Okay, so that's the measure phase. So I'm conscious of time. I'll keep moving here. So the analyze phase. Why is the problem happening? Let's get to those root causes. And again, lots more tools around here, but they're all about looking at the process and letting the data tell us what is really happening here. And let's get to that prioritized list of root causes. That really is our big deliverable for this one. Why is the problem happening? It's this, and this. Okay? And then I can start to line solutions up against those in the improve phase. And this is an iterative approach. And I like for this one, I like the metaphor of the crime scene investigation, right? I don't know if you guys watch any of these shows. These are very popular in sort of the last 10 or 15 years. These CSI shows, CSI, the one in Vegas, there's one in Miami, one in New York. I quite like NCIS, that's one of the good ones. But if you haven't seen these shows, they all follow the same sort of pattern or routine. So at the start of the show, somebody's dead, right? And you might see the lead up to it, you might not. But before the opening credits roll, someone's going to be killed in some way. And then we hear a song by The Who, possibly. And then all the crime scene investigators show up and they walk around and they start gathering data, basically. They take pictures, they scrape fingernails, they check liver temperatures. They all, I have a pen here. They all walk around holding their torches or their flashlights like this. Like normal people just hold it down, but it's got to be in the camera shot so it looks cool and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so thanks to these shows, there's been a huge increase in the sort of principle of what we do in problem solving. So, you know, we've got some data that's here, and we'll get that from the measure phase, and it's telling me that my internet connection is unstable. So I'll just keep going and hope that you guys can still hear me. Send me a chat if for some reason it's getting glitchy and I need to stop. But Zoom was warning me there. So you'll have lots of ideas for suspects. Like, so on these shows, again, if you haven't seen it, there's always a usual suspect. Right? Kaiser Sose for the film fans there. Like if you've got a woman who is killed, in real life, actually, it's more like 60 to 70% of the time, it's the husband or the boyfriend or the whatever male presence is most common in her life. It's going to be that person who did it, right? So there's always a usual suspect, you know. And on the TV shows, we know it's not them, right? Because if it was them, the credits would roll at like 12 minutes. You know, they grab them, they throw them in jail. Yep, it was them, and then it's done, right? So it's always more complicated in the TV shows. Real life's a little more, little different from that. Okay, but so the same principle is there for our problem solving. We are crime scene investigators as Six Sigma professionals. That's what we're doing. You know, something's killing our process. It's making it produce defects. Things are not working properly. You know, something like that. So we've got to be like CSI agents. So anyway, I was reading an article that was kind of talking about this phenomenon of these CSI shows. Because I don't know if you know this, but there's been a huge increase in people going to school to become forensic scientists as a result of these shows. Because it all looks really, really cool, right? Again, the reality is probably a little bit different. You probably aren't going to work in the dark. You know, it's not all going to be resolved in 42 minutes of screen time. You know, you probably won't have that one little bit of dirt in the database that you need to show that the killer was there. You know, all the shows are like that. Anyway, they're entertaining. I like them. So anyway, when I was reading this article about this, and this woman was talking about her experiences in the program she was doing. And she said, you know, they gave us some analysis to do. This was like a mock forensic study that we did. And she said, before I got started, I remembered the ABCs of forensic science, which is to assume nothing, believe nobody, and check everything. And I like that. I like that because it's not just the ABCs of forensic science, it's the ABCs of problem solving. It's the ABCs of Six Sigma there. Assume nothing, believe nobody, check everything. People are going to tell you what they think it is about why the problem's happening or what a possible solution is. They may well be right, but they could certainly be wrong. And I've got a great example for that one. So this was several years ago now. I was working with a financial services company, and one of their processes had suddenly become a big problem because they had changed the language on the letter. So if you don't want your card anymore, if you want to close your account, they changed the language in the letter to say, you should cut up your card and mail it back to us. And so what was happening is people would take their card, they would cut it up with scissors, right, into lots of pieces. They would stick it in an envelope, and then they would just mail it, right? No other information. Hi, my name is Dave. This is my card. Here's my account number. Please close it. Nothing. They were getting envelopes of plastic puzzle pieces. That was it. And of course, we don't know who it's from. So we don't know whose account they want to have closed. So people are having to sit and put all these pieces of plastic, they all were taking turns to put all these pieces of plastic back together to identify enough of what the card number is or the person's name to sort of figure it out. And of course, because you have customer account information, like personal details, it all has to be in a room with cameras and things like that, so you're not stealing their details, right? So anyway, so the green belt that I was training and coaching, she started this project, and she started looking into it to understand, you know, really the goal of her project originally was, how do we have a much faster process for doing this, because we have to. But I also challenged her to just to check, right? Talk to the lawyer, and she talked to the lawyer, and the lawyer said, yeah, we have to have them send the card back to us because that's what the guidelines from the Financial Services Authority tell me to do. And it would have been very easy to just go, okay, I got it. So we'll work on the process, right? But the green belt, she decided, I don't think I'm gonna just take that on face value. I'm gonna check that. And so she sat down and she spent a couple hours reading through the FSA guidelines. It was like 20 pages or something like that she read through to try to see, is there anything that requires us to cut up the card? And the answer was no. Actually, the lawyer was wrong, right? And maybe, who knows if even she read it. Maybe somebody told her that you should, or she thought maybe it's good from a risk perspective or whatever, but the guidance we were given was incorrect. So in the end, they very quickly were able to change the language, and things kind of went back to normal. You don't have to send the card back. You just have to destroy it, right? And actually, I told this story in the next round of green belts that I did. I actually told this story as a great example. Turns out the lawyer was in the room, so she was one of my participants in the room. Thankfully, I didn't say anything too horrible about her for that one. But you know, she did kind of admit and say, well, actually, I do kind of think it's the right thing to do. But anyway. So there we go. So that's that. It's really important to check everything. I'm not going to tell you my stories about the grocery tills just because I want to make sure we have time for questions here. I want to just briefly talk about improve and control and give you a little bit more there. So the improve phase, we mostly know how to do this, right? There are plenty of tools here, but of all the phases, this is the one that most people feel the most familiar with because we know how to fix things. You know, we can brainstorm ideas, we can make the plan to put the solutions in place. And if we've done a good job of getting our baseline, then we can do the validation. Does it look like things are better? And can I prove it? You know, do I have the after picture to go with the before picture? And one of the courses that we do in GELRAD, we do a simulation. It's a 2-day course. We have a process simulation that's there. And so we teach all the Lean Six Sigma tools kind of at the introductory level using this sim. And everyone's got a job. So all the participants in the course, they have a job. Some of them are customers, and most of the rest of them kind of sit in the middle, and they're the operators of the process. And the customers are submitting orders. And so we do round one kind of at the beginning of the course. And of course, it's a disaster. You know, a few of the jobs, they're completely busy the whole time. But most of the rest of the people, they don't have enough work to do. So the workload is off, the balance is off. Everything takes far too long. You know, it's a disaster there. And we then go through the Six Sigma methodology and over the course of the 2 days to use the tools to understand the customer requirements, map the process, look at the data. And in the end, we go through a round 2 and a pilot in round 3 and have a breakthrough in performance. And so I've done this many times. And so I've seen the same brainstorm many times, you know, about the same general subject. And I just want to share one story with you. That how it relates to the mindset is one of the groups, this a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, where we were kind of getting to the end of the time we'd allotted for the brainstorm. You know, they had some really good ideas. Nothing was anything different I hadn't seen before, and they weren't even some of the best ideas, but they had sort of something, and everyone was kind of quiet. And then one of the guys, his name's Brian, he goes by BK. BK goes, well, what if we... no, that's a stupid idea. And he stopped talking. And I said, no, Brian, tell me what were you about to say? And out came a genius idea, something I had never seen before for the sim. And it almost didn't come out, right? If he had had that little dialogue of what if we, no, it's stupid. If he'd had that in his head, we never would have gotten the genius solution or the great idea coming out. And it didn't come in the first 5 minutes or the 10 minutes or even the first 30 minutes of the brainstorm. You know, to get to the truly innovative ideas, it's going to take some time. You know, system one will give you the obvious stuff. Like literally every group I do for this, within the first 5 or 10 minutes, there is a set of solutions we always have. Okay, some of them are good ideas. Some of them are actually terrible ideas. They just look right. Okay, and I won't go into the details there because I don't know if you saw this in the corner. First rule of Sim Club is don't talk about Sim Club. So I'm not going to give that away to you in case someday we're all in the sim together. But the same ideas come out at the beginning. The great ones never come until later. So if you wanna find the really truly innovative ideas, it's going to take some time to engage system 2, to make new connections in your brain that you didn't make before, to think about what's possible based on what somebody else did. Or the other thing I've noticed with that sort of goes along with that is the ideas are influenced by the environment that we're in, right? So if we've got a big whiteboard up on the wall in the meeting room that we're in, the whiteboard can play a role in the final solution. It's a lot harder for other groups who don't have that to think, well, maybe we could have a big central space to work on, right? It takes longer for that idea to come out if it isn't physically present. So it's going to take some time for the innovation to come. Okay, so you can't shortcut it there. Okay, control. Once it's fixed, how do we make sure that it stays fixed? And that's back to our before and after picture from a data perspective and from a process perspective as well. And how are we going to respond when we see things start to go wrong? You know, the best kind of sustainability comes through how we deliver the solutions, like what the ideas we come up with. If I can completely mistake-proof it, I don't really have to keep an eye on it. Like if you could somehow make your weight go away forever, like some people do this with liposuction, like take the fat cells out so your body can't even store it there anymore. That's a more sustainable solution than just making them smaller for a period of time. I'm not saying to go out and get liposuction, okay? Control your food and your diet, that's important. But so the best way to achieve sustainability is through the solutions. But if you can't, we're gonna have to keep an eye on it in some way. And we have tools like the control plan and response plan to know what to do when things change. And then I can act on what I learned and identify the next product. There are probably other problems just like this in my area that I can solve, or people in other locations that have problems just like this, and I can share with them what we did. It may not be exactly the same problem with exactly the same causes and exactly the same solutions, but I bet there's a lot of similarities of what we can do. Okay, and I just want to tell one story briefly about the control phase, and then we'll kind of move into questions. So on the call is my guru, Ram Josila, and Ram and I, my first real interaction through Six Sigma was not myself. It was actually working with Ram, and Ram's from Chennai, but living in the U.S. for many, many years, and he's my guru, and one of the founders of GELRAD. And he started black belt training in 1996, I think it was, something like that, at GE. And he had a product where he was going out to a manufacturing facility, and they gave him a machine. Here's your black belt project, Ram. Sort out this machine. And this machine is this big beast that's like, 10-foot diameter sort of thing. And it welded parts. So it welded a little molybdenum foil onto a tungsten wire, which is not an easy thing to do. And so we had to do this product. And this machine was producing loads of scrap. That's the language that's used, where the welds aren't going properly, the pins are getting bent, things are missing as it goes to feed the foil, and it misses and falls off the bottom of the machine and so on. And so this thing was, once they finally got the data, they discovered this was producing more than $250,000 worth of lost money. Okay? We call it cost of poor quality every year doing this. And so his product was kind of to sort this out. So he did a number of things to solve the problem around changing some of the design of how the foil is fed, but even simple things like, maybe we should follow the instructions of when we should maintain the machine and actually do that according to what the experts say we should be doing, rather than just deciding ourselves when we should do the cleaning and replacing certain parts and so on. Anyway, so he solved the problem, and this involved a lot of work where he was trying to touch all three shifts. So I hardly saw the guy as well. He'd be sleeping when I left for work in the morning, and then he'd head out and catch day shift, and then part of the evening shift and part of the night shift. So, trying to work with all three of the shifts running 24 hours. So it was kind of a big job. So he finally got to the end, and he said to the plant manager, right, they solved the problem, spent like less than $500 to fix this problem, and said to the plant manager, will you please sign off my project, right? Because that's part of the process. And the plant manager said, no, not gonna do that. And here's why. I wanna make sure that this thing still works while you're not standing there with everybody watching them and telling them what to do and reminding them of the solutions that we've created and so on. And so we waited, and actually Ram went to India and went for a home visit and saw people there, right? And then came back several weeks later to be able to say, okay, now it looks like things are still working. I'll go ahead and sign off your product. You can then work on the next one. Okay, so it's important that when you fix the problem, it's going to be sustainable under normal conditions. Because if you think about weight loss, and maybe the last time we can use that example, you can lose weight. I guarantee you can lose weight. That's the Dave Hauff weight loss approach, right? Don't eat today. Don't eat today. Don't drink anything. Okay, you will weigh less tomorrow. For sure, that is true, right? But that is not a long-term sustainable solution to the problem. And a lot of times the solutions that come up, or the obvious ones that System 1 gives you, are the business process equivalent of don't eat today. Right? So we'll do some kind of Herculean effort to make it all work, but there's no way that's sustainable under the normal conditions. Okay, so we've got to be able to find the solutions you come up with. They can't just be these one-off extra Herculean sort of efforts. I've got to get something that's going to work for me every single day. And actually, most of those diets, like the Atkins, that is where they fall down. It's often very difficult to follow them when you get back to sort of normal, right? Like go to a coffee shop. Everything in there is made of carbs, and that even includes the coffee, right? A shot of espresso has 1 or 2 grams of carbs in it, something like that. Okay, so that's kind of it for the methodology. So there's one or two wrap-up slides, and then we're going to talk questions. Okay, so what does it take to be successful in Six Sigma? There's a lot of things, but there's the 4 I wanted to highlight here just briefly. Number 1 is tenacity, right? So think of Ram as an example because we just talked about that. Being able to stick with it to make sure that it gets done. That is often difficult because you will face resistance, especially from people who think they already know what the answer is or that we're wasting our time getting the data or whatever. You've got to stick with it to get something delivered. And that comes down to some courage as well, right? The courage to challenge what's there, to tell the engineer, I think you're wrong, actually, and I've got the data to prove it. I can show you that. And we've talked about mindset at the beginning and kind of as we went through, open to learn that I could be wrong. And there may be something new that I could do differently in here. And really, in all the work that we do with with various companies, it usually comes down to, do I have the support from the leadership? You know, are the leaders saying, this is important that we think and work this way? And it worked at GE, which is maybe not the best company these days because things are a lot different to 20 years ago, but maybe not the best example. But things worked because the leadership absolutely 100% supported that and made sure that we did it. And the customers that we work with that invest in the time for the leaders to really understand it, these are the ones who really get all the benefits out of the program. Just briefly on levels of certification that's there. I know that we'll be offering through the university some yellow and green belt training. Those are kind of the introductory levels of training where you're learning the basics of the tools. The kind of the things that we'll talk about in part 3 are generally at that yellow and green belt level. But then you have black belts and master black belts, people whose job it is full time to work on Six Sigma or problem solving, and they have a role in coaching and training other people there. But it's not just about knowing the tools, it's actually about delivering something. So to be certified in any of these, you do actually have to finish a project. You know, and I think Six Sigma is really powerful, and one of the reasons for that is this: when you're smart, people need you. And this is a quote from one of my all-time favorite films, Real Genius, starring Val Kilmer. It was really only his 2nd film, actually, in 1985. It's a very quotable film, lots of great things in it. And one of my favorite lines that he says is, when you're smart, people need you. And Six Sigma is a way of being smart and being smarter. And it's not just about the smart, it's that I can take it and turn it into action. There's a lot of smart people in the world. The important thing is that tenacity to stick with it and deliver something. Okay, and Six Sigma makes it possible for you to be able to do that. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop now. I went maybe a few more minutes than we originally planned, but I'm ready to take some questions. I haven't seen anything come in on the chat, but if you do have some questions, now's a great time. I don't know if you're able to come off mute or just simply stick it in the chat, but I'm ready to answer any of the questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Dev, for this wonderful session on Introduction to Six Sigma. There are 2 questions which are there in the chat box. One question from the Firdaus Solanki. In Industry 4.0 environment, what role quality management will have when smart, interconnected cyber physical system takes their own decisions based on real-time data?
Yes, okay. Right, the world of our future robot overlords. What is this going to mean? So let me think. I'm trying to think if there's anybody I'm working with where we're talking about this. There's one company where we are looking at predictive modeling as part of the work that we're doing. So kind of a bit beyond the green belt sort of level. And the goal is that part of that to then work that into robotic process automation. So how do I then make the computers smart enough to make some of these decisions and do things for us? And in the end, at least the experience I've had so far, these robots, they don't yet really program themselves for the most part. Such things do exist in laboratories, but it's kind of down to us to help build the model that's going to make it do it. So for example, like I worked with a company and they were looking at capturing fraud. You know, so how do we identify that there's fraud happening in this was a company that has a lot of retail sites. How do they catch their own employees? And we actually developed a kind of through some analysis, a way of identifying behaviors that were unusual. And what we could then do is set up the system to automatically flag that when it happens. So we could then go look at what's going on in this location. Let's go pull the cameras and do that. Right, so at least at this stage, we're still in the place where the humans are going to have to decide what those models look like, what do those decision-making processes look like, how can I use statistics and probability to identify those unusual behaviors. And that, I think, is part of the exciting work that we've all got happening for us in the coming years and decades there. Is how do we make that much more of it, the logic into the systems. But for now, I would say my experience is we're still safe at needing the humans to do the deeper thinking for us, to look at the chart and go, why does it look like that? It shouldn't look like. What is that little bump that is happening there? In a way that our technology is not ready to catch up. It can flag that there's something worth looking at, but it's not yet able to tell us why. That's where we need that tenacity to dig into it and try to understand it. Okay. If I didn't quite answer your question, maybe drop a follow-up into the comments and I'm happy to answer.
The next question is from Mr. Dilip Mathur. How to apply this to issues that matter most? Example, optimizing life under COVID.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. One of the companies I'm working with, I'm working with the finance department, and this training that we're doing, the problem-solving training, they give it to a variety of groups. So I work with their entry-level development programs. So people that are straight out of university, they go through a 2-year program, they do rotations, they have a lot of leadership training. I do this with them, but I also work with a mid-level manager kind of program where they've been there maybe sort of 7 to 10 years, this kind of group. So it's a more senior group. And then they have to do projects over the course of a year, and I coach them through these projects. And one of the projects that we're working on is what does the new working environment look like now that we're living with COVID, right? So it's kind of early days there, so I can't actually give you any super insights in terms of what they've seen so far. But the approach that we're taking around that is we're looking at what's happening today. So let's actually talk to people, because we didn't plan for it. We had to do it. Everyone is all of a sudden working from home. So what does that mean? So what does that mean from a process perspective? What does that mean from an environment perspective? Like, what kind of kit do people have working from home? What does that mean for energy usage? What does that mean for broadband and so on? In fact, one of the insights that came that one of the team members said, I won't say it exactly right, but the comment was something like, Corona has been great for your working environment if you're a rich white person, right? And by that I mean that the people who have the ability to have space and work in their home office, like right now I have a room that is what I'm working in. For us, it's been relatively, it's not been all that difficult for me. I worked from home anyway when I wasn't traveling, so it's not a big deal. But if you're someone who's working in a transaction processing center, maybe in a country that doesn't have so much wealth or whatever, this is a disaster. You can't work from home to do your job, or when you do, the quality of the broadband and all that doesn't work. So what we're doing with that project is looking at what are all those impacts. So one of the tools is a cause and effect diagram, where you're trying to solve the problem by thinking about what could be all possible causes for this effect that we see, which is my payments are late or something like that. If you take that picture and flip it around, we have an event that says all of a sudden we're all working from home. That's the cause. What are all the possible effects of that? So that's what the team is looking at now to understand what's happening. So we're using the same Six Sigma thinking and rigor and tools to approach it. And so far, again, I haven't seen any of the specific insights yet, but that's what we're doing, trying to understand from a data perspective and from a human perspective, what are the things that are working, what are things that are not working, and what does that then mean for the future? So will we have as many offices? Are we gonna maybe cut that down? Will there be a new system where you book a desk in the same way that you might book a meeting room in the future? So I think it's early days for that, but absolutely this work is being done by not just companies we're working with, but I'm sure loads of other companies. Again, applying the same thinking and tools to measure and understand what's going on and to decide what are the best strategies and best practices moving forward.
The next question is from Ms. Richa Shah. Can learning Six Sigma be useful in project management and construction management?
Yes, absolutely. So, sometimes you'll see, like if you get involved in PMP or whatever, Six Sigma courses count for PMP credits. Okay, which if there's anyone PMP certified, you're probably very excited. Can you count this hour and a half? I don't know. We could check, right? These things go hand in hand. You know, I kind of said it early on, you need all these pieces, but the project management pieces, they very much help you with the structure of what you're doing for the product. So let's make sure that we've got the right team, we've got the timelines, we manage risks, you know, we have high level and detailed plans and so on. All that stuff is that general project management, those pieces. We need all of that. What that usually does not have is the problem solving elements of that. And that's where Six Sigma very nicely fills in the gaps there. So I know that I need to, like construction design was mentioned, I know I need to make a change here for how I do maybe this piece of work, or let me think. Project we coached around building natural gas wells, kind of drilling for natural gas wells, and the time it took to mobilize everything to be ready and then to go to the next location to drill again. And they have the project management for how to do that, but it didn't say, how do I change this process to make it better? And that's where the Six Sigma tools and thinking then help you, right? So they had all this to get it done, but it was taking way too long to do that. How can I compress that? Where are the places that we're wasting time? Where are we making mistakes and so on, and how do we eliminate that? So really, these things go absolutely hand in hand. I personally believe that every product manager should also be an expert in Six Sigma, because it allows you to not only get through the project, but actually do it in a much better and smarter and leaner and faster way than you might otherwise do.
The next question is from Mr. Ojas Bhatt. In problem solving, how much weight give to intuition as compared to systematic Six Sigma approach?
Yeah, how much do I rely on system 1 versus system 2? Yeah, not an easy question. Not an easy question for that. The approach I generally take as a coach around that is when we start the project and we're capturing maybe a project charter or problem statement information, we start the brainstorm. People will almost always give ideas for solutions. In fact, I can remember some years ago, I did a session where we even included it in the kickoff. Let's just do the brainstorm where we say, you know, tell us all the things you think we should do to make it better. Give me all your system 1, your intuition, all that. We'll write it all down so that then as we carry on through measure and analyze, we've got some ideas of things worth investigating, because those solution ideas can be instructive. You know, that's a good solution. Why do we think it's a good solution? Why would that one work? Can help me understand where to look in the process to see if that is the best solution, or maybe there's a different one, right? So so there's definitely a role for intuition, but I always coach like let's be careful, and often the question comes down to what's the risk of being wrong, right? So if you've got an intuition of what to do and it's cheap and easy to try that out, go try it out. Do the do, learn, do. It's absolutely fine if it costs you nothing. Go right ahead and do that. If we think it's low risk of making things worse. If it is going to make things worse, or if it is higher risk, I would definitely say, okay, thanks for the intuition. Let's make sure we do measure and analyze before we do any kind of quick win using that sort of approach. And also, I do find sometimes the leaders are the hardest customers for this, because many of them are in the roles that they're in because their system 1 has been very good. You know, over the years with little data, they've been able to come up with a smart and right thing to do, and they've been right. And so they've been successful, and so we've promoted them. So sometimes they're my hardest customers. And when I do sponsor training, I just did some a couple weeks ago, that's one of the biggest things I have to remind them is, you know, not everybody maybe has as good an intuition as you do. And you may be surprised at what the team comes up with. So if you tell them to go implement a gym membership, they will go do that because you're the boss. And they'll go do that. If you can give them the freedom to figure out for themselves that they need a gym membership, not only will you get perhaps the best solution possible, you'll also get the buy-in from the people who are involved in identifying that. So you can kind of hold off on that. Make sure you share with them the idea, but don't make them do it. Don't just go straight with your intuition. Have that checked. You know, to be ready to say, I could be wrong, you know, is an important part of that mindset. And so it's not an easy answer to that one, other than you're going to have to make some judgment based on risk and the amount of time that you have.
The next question is from Deep Patil, which is related to this question. How to improve system 2 thinking from our day-to-day life? How
do we improve system 2 thinking in the day-to-day life? Well, I would suggest, first of all, read the book, because that's going to give you a lot of insight into how people think. So I mentioned some of the cognitive biases that are there. There are loads more in the book. But it's interesting, actually, Kahneman's kind of a funny guy in that he says in the book, he said, I wrote this, the purpose I wrote this book is so that when we're all standing around at the water cooler, okay, so the metaphor there is, if I'm in the company and I've just gone to the shared source of water for the office, we stand there and we gossip, right? And we talk about the stupid things that other people did. So when we're doing that, we have a language and a framework to understand why those people do that, and to talk about that, right? And to hopefully avoid it. But he's actually said quite openly is, he says, I'm quite cynical about whether we can actually change it. You know, even when you know a bias, that you have a bias, it's very difficult to not have that bias, right? And so it really does rely on a shared community of people to help each other, right? So I'm going to have the bias. I'm not going to see the bias, but if I've got someone to help me to recognize that, it's far easier to see other people's mistakes than it is to see your own. So building a community of people who think and talk like this, and I think Six Sigma is actually part of it. The Six Sigma thinking is right. So I think I think the Six Sigma approach kind of helps with that because it forces you to walk through in a systematic way to document what it is that you're doing, and then anybody can challenge that. So I think so, and then just again back to the I could be wrong. That is to accept that I may be biased here, and I've got to recognize that. It's very difficult to do that, especially in the world of social media when a lot of our friends are our echo chamber, and they validate the things we say that are probably wrong.
The next question is, how can we transform people's mindset to have an increased ownership through Six Sigma?
How can we transform the mindset to have increased ownership? Yeah, I think I'll go back to the earlier comment I made about the leadership, and so that's true whether you are the leader yourself or you're on the receiving end of that. If the leader gives it a priority, then it will get done. Okay? And that has nothing to do with whether that's Six Sigma or any other business initiative. If the leader says it's important, if the leader shows that that's where they're spending time, that's where the team and the organization will spend time. So that's true for us in a business context. That's true at a from a personal perspective as well. To believe that it is useful and valuable to think and work in this way requires some tenacity and some dedication to sort of do that, right? And we show that by how we spend our time, right? So I'm sure we've all said it, myself included, we've said, I'm sorry, I don't have enough time for that, okay? And maybe if you've had kids, I have 2 kids, maybe you've even caught yourself saying to the kids, I'm sorry, I don't have time to play with you right now, something like that. But if you think about that statement, it's actually wrong. It's actually wrong, because time exists, there are 24 hours in the day, always, right? There's no, we can talk, someone's gonna say, oh yeah, what about when we go on daylight savings time or not? Right, but we all have the same amount of time. It's actually down to how you choose to use it, right? So when you say, I don't have time for that, what you're really saying is something else is a higher priority than what I'm being asked for now. So really, I try to think about that. When I say to my kids, I don't have time to do that, imagine myself saying, I'm sorry, darling, you're not a priority right now. And that actually makes me rethink or refocus how I think about that concept of time. So I would suggest it does come down to a prioritization of where you spend your time, and do you believe that it's actually useful and important to do that? And from experience, the strongest way for that to happen is for you to experience it yourself. The breakthrough comes when you actually try it, you walk through the methodology, whether you're improving something in your work practice or even redesigning how you lay out your kitchen. I mean, we can talk a bit more about that when we talk about 5S in Lean next week or in part 3. To do that, you can apply those tools. You can see the value of doing
that. There are a couple of more questions which are related to application of Six Sigma in educational institute, pharma, or day-to-day life. Maybe we will respond back through email or maybe the next session as we are running out of the time.
Okay.
So thank you, Mr. Dev, for this wonderful session on Introduction to Six Sigma. I'm sure all of us would have got something to take home from this webinar. For example, Six Sigma mindset, System 1 and System 2 thinkings, importance of direction, that's a definition stage in the Six Sigma process, and the ABC of problem solving. And due to this, our expectation will increase for the next session, which is scheduled on 21st July, same time, same place. However, you also learn that these concepts do helps us to understand the Six Sigma, but the real result will come only through the application of these concepts in the work. And for that, a person should acquire a skill related to Lean Six Sigma. Here, the Navrachana University and GELRAD in collaboration are going to organize certificate programs for Yellow Belt and Green Belt in the coming months. And we will keep all the participants informed about this. And we invite you to join this program as well. So thank you very much for all the participants. And we will keep organizing such kind of webinars through Center for Professional Education, Navrachana University, where we organize training programs for corporate clients, academic institutes, and for the individuals. These programs are in the form of small programs like MDPs, FDPs, skill development programs, or it can be a certificate programs for duration of a couple of months, or it can be a degree and diploma programs like executive MBAs and postgraduate diploma programs. This program we offer either on campus, at your site, or through online or through blended mode. So we request all of you to be with us and keep watching our webinar. Thank you very much.
I really want to thank you, Nilay Bhai and Dinesh Bhai, for arranging this. This was great. And Dave, great job. You gave us a lot of very informative, nice webinar today. So on behalf of all the participants, I would like to thank you. And let's look forward to the next two in the series.
Right. Okay. So thank you very much once again. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Praveer, Elaine, and Ram, the founders of GELRAD. Thanks to all the participants today. We saw a very large number attending the Zoom session. There were also a large number on the YouTube. So thank you so much.